Emily adjusted the collar of her blue uniform, the fabric a bit stiff from too many washes. The fluorescent lights above her head buzzed, casting a stark white glow over the deserted gas station. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 11:57 p.m. 3 minutes until midnight. 3 minutes until another lonely night shift officially began. The gas station was located on the outskirts of town, where the only visitors at this hour were truckers passing through and the occasional insomniac. Emily had grown used to the solitude, finding a strange comfort in the quiet hum of the refrigerators and the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Yet recently, her sense of peace had been shattered. About a month ago, he started showing up. A man, always dressed in black, with a gaze that felt like icy fingers creeping down her spine. His name was Jack, or at least that's what he'd told her. He was tall, his face shadowed under the brim of a baseball cap, eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. At first, he'd seemed harmless enough, just another lonely soul wandering the midnight streets. But soon, his visits became more frequent, his behavior more erratic. He would stand too close, his eyes never leaving her face, his voice a low murmur of words she couldn't quite understand. Emily had made it clear she wasn't interested, but Jack's obsession only grew. She had told her manager, reported it to the police, but there wasn't much they could do. Jack hadn't done anything illegal, they said. They couldn't stop him from coming into a public place. But Emily felt the fear gnawing at her insides every time she saw him, the walls of the gas station closing in around her. Tonight, the air felt thick with tension. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She wiped the counter for the 100th time, trying to keep her hands busy, her mind distracted. A car pulled up to pump number 3, and she forced herself to relax. It was just a customer, nothing more. The door chimed as a middle-aged man in a worn-out jacket stepped inside. Emily greeted him with a polite smile, ringing up his purchase quickly. As he left, she caught a glimpse of movement outside, a dark figure lurking near the edge of the parking lot. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew it was him. Jack was back. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She couldn't let him see her fear. Not again. She had to stay strong, had to believe that he would get bored and move on eventually. But a tiny voice in the back of her mind whispered that tonight might be different. The clock struck midnight, the chime echoing through the empty station. Emily's pulse quickened. The door swung open, and Jack stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft click, sealing her fate for the night. Jack's presence filled the room like a suffocating fog. Emily felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead as she forced herself to meet his gaze. He smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of his lips that made her stomach churn. "Evening, Emily," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "Quiet night, isn't it?" Emily nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She busied herself with organizing the candy bars on the counter, anything to avoid his piercing stare. Jack took a step closer, his boots echoing on the linoleum floor. She could smell his cologne, a sharp, almost metallic scent that made her head spin. "You look tired," he said, his eyes boring into her. "Long shift?" She nodded again, trying to keep her breathing steady. "Yeah, it's been a long day," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I help you with something, Jack?" His smile widened. "Just here for some company," he said, leaning on the counter. "It gets lonely out there, you know?" Emily swallowed hard, her mind racing. She needed to stay calm, to keep him talking. If she could just get through the next few minutes, maybe he would leave. "I understand," she said, forcing a smile, "but I'm really busy tonight. Lots of paperwork to catch up on." Jack's eyes narrowed and he tilted his head, studying her. "Paperwork, huh? At midnight? Seems a bit odd." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "Yeah, well, it's part of the job," she said, trying to sound casual. "Keeps me busy." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pocket knife, flipping it open and closed with a practiced flick of his wrist. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, her eyes locked on the blade. She had to think fast. "Jack, you can't have that in here," she said, her voice shaking. "It's against store policy." He chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Relax, Emily. I'm not here to cause trouble. Just thought we could have a little chat." Emily took a step back, her hand inching toward the phone under the counter. She needed to call for help. but Jack's eyes followed her every move. "We can chat, but you need to put that away," she said, trying to sound firm. Jack's smile faded, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of something dark in his eyes. He snapped the knife shut and slipped it back into his pocket. "There, happy now?" She nodded, forcing herself to breathe. "Thank you. Now, is there anything else you need?" Jack leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Just you, Emily. Just you." Emily's blood ran cold. She felt trapped, the walls of the gas station closing in around her. She had to get out of there, but Jack was between her and the door. Her mind raced, searching for a way to escape. She glanced at the security cameras, hoping they were recording. Maybe someone would see and come to her rescue. But deep down, she knew she was on her own, and she had to find a way to survive the night. Emily's eyes darted to the emergency exit at the back of the store. It was only a few feet away, but with Jack so close it might as well have been miles. She needed to keep him distracted, to find a way to get to the door without raising his suspicions. "Jack," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why don't you tell me what's really going on? You come here every night, but we never really talk. Maybe it's time we did." Jack's eyes lit up with interest, and he leaned back slightly, giving her some much-needed space. "You want to talk?" "All right, Emily, let's talk." Emily swallowed her fear and nodded. "Okay, but first, how about a drink? I could use something to calm my nerves. How about you?" Jack raised an eyebrow, considering her offer. "Sure, why not?" he said, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "What do you have in mind?" Emily moved slowly, trying not to provoke him. She stepped behind the counter, where the mini-fridge was stocked with sodas and water. "How about a soda?" she asked, pulling out 2 cans. "My treat." Jack watched her closely, his eyes never leaving her hands. "Sounds good," he said, taking the can she offered. "Cheers." Emily forced a smile and opened her soda, taking a small sip. Jack did the same, his gaze still fixed on her. She needed to keep him engaged, to buy herself more time. "So Jack," she said, leaning against the counter, "what do you do when you're not here?" He shrugged, taking another sip of his drink. "Not much. I like to keep to myself. You know how it is." Emily nodded, pretending to understand. "Yeah, I get that. Sometimes it's nice to be alone." Jack's eyes darkened, and he took a step closer. "You don't really get it, do you, Emily? You have people, friends, family. I have no one." Emily's heart ached with a mix of fear and pity. She needed to find a way to relate to him, to keep him calm. "I'm sorry, Jack," she said softly. "That sounds really hard." He stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he slammed the soda can on the counter, making Emily jump. "Don't pretend to care!" he snapped. "You don't know what it's like to be completely alone." Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had to think of something, anything to defuse the situation. "You're right, Jack. I don't know what it's like, but maybe we can help each other. You don't have to be alone anymore." Jack's eyes flickered with a strange mixture of hope and distrust. Help each other? How? Emily glanced at the phone again, trying to gauge the distance. "We can start by talking, really talking. But first, I need to check something in the back. Just give me a minute, okay?" Jack's eyes narrowed and he grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron. "You're not going anywhere, Emily." Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Okay, she said, raising her free hand in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going anywhere. Let's just keep talking." Jack slowly released her wrist, but his eyes never left her face. "Fine, but no tricks, Emily. I'm watching you." Emily nodded, her mind racing. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. The emergency exit was still her best bet, but she had to be smart about it. She couldn't let Jack see her fear. She had to stay strong, to keep him talking until she could find her moment to escape. As Jack rambled on about his lonely life, Emily's eyes scanned the room for anything she could use as a weapon or distraction. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Her life depended on it. Jack raised an eyebrow, considering her offer. "Sure, why not?" he said, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "What do you have in mind?" Emily moved slowly, trying not to provoke him. She stepped behind the counter, where the mini-fridge was stocked with sodas and water. "How about a soda?" she asked, pulling out 2 cans. "My treat." Jack watched her closely, his eyes never leaving her hands. "Sounds good," he said, taking the can she offered. Cheers. Emily forced a smile and opened her soda, taking a small sip. Jack did the same, his gaze still fixed on her. She needed to keep him engaged, to buy herself more time. So Jack, she said, leaning against the counter, what do you do when you're not here? He shrugged, taking another sip of his drink. Not much. I like to keep to myself. You know how it is. Emily nodded, pretending to understand. Yeah, I get that. Sometimes it's nice to be alone. Jack's eyes darkened, and he took a step closer. You don't really get it, do you, Emily? You have people, friends, family. I have no one. Emily's heart ached with a mix of fear and pity. She needed to find a way to relate to him, to keep him calm. I'm sorry, Jack, she said softly. That sounds really hard. He stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he slammed the soda can on the counter, making Emily jump. Don't pretend to care, he snapped. You don't know what it's like to be completely alone. Emily took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had to think of something, anything, to defuse the situation. You're right, Jack. I don't know what it's like. But maybe we can help each other. You don't have to be alone anymore. Jack's eyes flickered with a strange mixture of hope and distrust. Help each other? How? Emily glanced at the phone again, trying to gauge the distance. We can start by talking, really talking. But first, I need to check something in the back. Just give me a minute, okay? Jack's eyes narrowed, and he grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron. You're not going anywhere, Emily. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Okay, she said, raising her free hand in a gesture of peace. I'm not going anywhere. Let's just keep talking. Jack slowly released her wrist, but his eyes never left her face. Fine, but no tricks, Emily. I'm watching you. Emily nodded, her mind racing. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. The emergency exit was still her best bet, but she had to be smart about it. She couldn't let Jack see her fear. She had to stay strong, to keep him talking until she could find her moment to escape. As Jack rambled on about his lonely life, Emily's eyes scanned the room for anything she could use as a weapon or distraction. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Her life depended on it. Then she saw it. A heavy-duty flashlight sitting on the shelf behind the counter. If she could just reach it, she might have a chance to defend herself. Emily took a deep breath and decided to take a risk. Jack, I've been thinking, she said, trying to sound sincere. Maybe we could be friends. I mean, we see each other almost every night. It makes sense, right? Jack's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment Emily saw a flicker of hope in his gaze. You really mean that? She nodded, inching closer to the flashlight. Yeah, I do. But friends need to trust each other. Can you trust me, Jack? He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. I want to trust you, Emily, but you have to prove it. Emily's heart raced. This was her chance. She reached for the flashlight, her fingers closing around the cool metal handle. I will, Jack, I promise. But as she brought the flashlight up, ready to strike, Jack's expression changed. His eyes hardened, and he lunged at her, grabbing her wrist with a force that made her cry out in pain. You lied to me, he shouted, his face twisted with rage. You were going to hurt me. Emily struggled, trying to break free, but Jack's grip was too strong. She had to think fast, had to find a way to turn the tables. I'm sorry, Jack, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't going to hurt you. I was just scared. His grip loosened slightly, and Emily seized the opportunity. She swung the flashlight with all her might, catching Jack on the side of the head. He stumbled back, dazed, and Emily didn't waste a second. She sprinted for the emergency exit, her heart pounding in her chest. She hit the door with her shoulder, bursting out into the cool night air. Her lungs burned as she ran, her mind a blur of fear and adrenaline. She could hear Jack shouting behind her, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. She had to keep running, to find help, to survive. The darkness swallowed her as she fled into the night, the gas station and Jack's terrifying presence fading behind her. But she knew this wasn't over. Jack would come for her, and she had to be ready. Emily's mind raced as she bolted through the emergency exit, her legs pumping with adrenaline-fueled speed. The cool night air hit her like a slap, shocking her senses into overdrive. She could hear Jack's furious shouts behind her, but she didn't dare look back. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get as far away from him as possible. She sprinted across the empty parking lot, her shoes slapping against the pavement. The streetlights cast long shadows, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She reached the edge of the lot and darted into the darkened alley behind the gas station, hoping to find some place to hide. The alley was narrow and cluttered with trash bins and discarded boxes. Emily ducked behind a large dumpster, pressing her back against the cold metal. She clamped a hand over her mouth, trying to quiet her breathing. Her heart pounded in her ears, each beat a reminder of how close she'd come to disaster. Moments later, she heard the heavy thud of footsteps approaching. Jack was close, too close. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to be invisible. She could hear him muttering to himself, his voice a low, angry growl. "Where are you, Emily?" Jack's voice echoed in the alley. "You can't hide from me. I'll find you." Emily's pulse quickened, fear tightening its grip on her chest. She had to think of a way out, a way to escape. She scanned her surroundings, looking for anything that might help her. Then she saw a fire escape ladder hanging just a few feet above her head. Carefully, Emily stood up, trying to keep her movements as quiet as possible. She reached up and grabbed the bottom rung of the ladder, pulling it down with a creak. She glanced over her shoulder, but Jack was still searching the other end of the alley. This was her chance. Emily climbed the ladder, her muscles straining with the effort. She reached the first landing and paused, peering over the edge to see if Jack had noticed her. He was still muttering, his frustration growing with every passing second. She had to keep moving. She ascended the fire escape, her hands gripping the cold metal railings. The higher she climbed, the safer she felt. Finally, she reached the roof of the building and pulled herself over the edge. She lay there for a moment, catching her breath, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. From her vantage point, she could see the gas station below, its fluorescent lights glaring in the darkness. Jack was still in the alley, his movements frantic as he searched for her. Emily knew she couldn't stay on the roof forever, but it gave her a moment to think, to plan her next move. She looked around, spotting a neighboring building with a lower roof. If she could jump across, she might be able to make her way to the main street and find help. Emily stood up, her legs shaking, and took a deep breath. She backed up a few steps, then ran towards the edge of the roof, leaping across the gap with all her strength. Her feet landed on the other side and she stumbled, almost losing her balance. But she caught herself, her heart pounding with relief. She hurried across the rooftop, finding another fire escape that led down to the street. Carefully, she climbed down, her eyes scanning for any sign of Jack. When she reached the ground, she took off running again, her feet pounding against the pavement. She didn't stop until she saw the bright lights of a 24-hour diner up ahead. Emily burst through the doors, her appearance drawing startled looks from the few late-night patrons inside. "Help me," she gasped, her voice trembling. "Please, I need help." A kind-looking waitress rushed over, her eyes wide with concern. "What happened, honey? Are you all right?" Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "There's a man. He's been following me. I think he's trying to kill me." The waitress nodded, guiding Emily to a booth and handing her a phone. "You're safe here. Call the police, sweetheart. We'll make sure nothing happens to you." Emily dialed the number with shaking hands, her heart still racing. As she spoke to the dispatcher, she glanced out the window, half expecting to see Jack's menacing figure lurking outside. But there was nothing, just the quiet streets and the distant hum of traffic. For the first time that night, Emily allowed herself to believe she might actually be safe. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Jack wouldn't give up that easily. She had to stay strong, to be ready for whatever came next. And most importantly, she had to find a way to make sure Jack never hurt anyone again. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow through the diner's windows. Emily was still shaking as she recounted her ordeal to the officers, her voice wavering with exhaustion and fear. They took her statement, their expressions growing grimmer with each detail she provided. "You did the right thing coming here," one of the officers assured her, his voice calm and steady. "We'll find him. We'll make sure he doesn't hurt you again." Emily nodded, but the fear in her heart was still there, gnawing at her insides. She knew Jack wouldn't stop until he had her, and she couldn't live her life in constant terror. She had to find a way to end this nightmare. The officers escorted her to a patrol car, and as she stepped outside, Emily glanced around, half expecting to see Jack lurking in the shadows. But the street was empty, the night silent. They drove her to the station, where they arranged for a temporary protective order and a safe place for her to stay. For the next few days, Emily stayed with a friend. never leaving the house, the fear always lurking at the back of her mind. She kept in touch with the police, who assured her they were doing everything they could to find Jack. But the days stretched into a week, and there was still no sign of him. The uncertainty was unbearable. One evening, as Emily sat by the window, staring out into the darkening sky, her phone rang. It was Officer Daniels, the one who had taken her statement at the diner. His voice was urgent. "Emily, we've got a lead. We think we know where Jack is. Stay put and don't open the door for anyone. We're on our way." Her heart raced as she hung up the phone. This could be it. This could be the moment when she finally found peace. But as the minutes ticked by, the fear crept back in. What if something went wrong? What if Jack found her first? Suddenly, there was a noise at the door, a soft, almost imperceptible click. Emily's blood ran cold. She grabbed a kitchen knife, her hands shaking as she backed away from the door. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for a place to hide. The door slowly creaked open, and Jack stepped inside, his eyes wild and filled with fury. "You thought you could hide from me, Emily?" he hissed, his voice dripping with menace. "You thought you could get away?" Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground, gripping the knife tighter. "Stay back, Jack," she warned, her voice trembling but determined. "The police are on their way. It's over." He laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the room. "It's never over, Emily. Not until I say it is." He lunged at her, and Emily swung the knife, catching him on the arm. He howled in pain, but it only seemed to fuel his rage. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it until she cried out and dropped the knife. She fought back, kicking and clawing, desperate to break free. In the struggle, they knocked over a lamp, and the room plunged into darkness. Emily scrambled away, her eyes adjusting to the faint light from the street outside. She could hear Jack moving, his heavy breathing giving away his position. She saw the outline of his figure near the window and grabbed a vase from the table. She hurled it with all her strength, hitting him square in the head. Jack staggered, dazed, and Emily seized the opportunity to run to the door. She burst outside just as the police arrived, their sirens blaring. The officers rushed in, tackling Jack to the ground and handcuffing him. Emily watched, her heart pounding as they dragged him away, his screams of rage echoing in her ears. Officer Daniels approached her, his expression softening. "It's over, Emily. You're safe now." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. She was safe. Finally, she was safe. In the days that followed, Emily slowly began to rebuild her life. She returned to work, surrounded by friends and co-workers who supported her. The fear that had once consumed her began to fade, replaced by a newfound strength. Jack was charged with multiple offenses and sentenced to prison. Knowing he was behind bars brought Emily a sense of closure, a chance to move forward without the shadow of fear hanging over her. But she knew she would never forget the lessons she'd learned. She would always be vigilant, always be strong, and she would never let anyone take her freedom away again. As she stood in front of the gas station one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emily smiled. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. She was a survivor, and she would live her life on her own terms, free from fear. Months passed, and the nightmares that had once haunted Emily's nights began to fade. She no longer jumped at shadows or felt the urge to constantly look over her shoulder. Instead, she found solace in the routine of her daily life and the support of those around her. The gas station, once a place of terror, became a symbol of her resilience and strength. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the town, Emily decided to take a walk. She wandered through familiar streets, breathing in the cool, crisp air, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The past was behind her, and she was ready to embrace the future. She reached the park, a place she hadn't visited since that night. It was quiet, save for the distant laughter of children and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. Emily found a bench and sat down, her thoughts drifting to everything she had endured and overcome. As she sat there, lost in contemplation, a voice broke through her reverie. "Mind if I join you?" Emily looked up to see Officer Daniels standing nearby, a warm smile on his face. She nodded and he took a seat beside her. "How have you been?" he asked, his tone gentle and concerned. Emily smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in a long time. "I'm doing better. A lot better, actually. It's been a journey, but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again." Daniels nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding. I'm glad to hear that. You've been through a lot, Emily. More than anyone should have to endure. She looked out at the park, the memories of her ordeal still lingering but no longer paralyzing. I learned a lot about myself, about my strength, and about the importance of asking for help. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's not easy to reach out, especially when you're scared. But you did, and it made all the difference. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the world go by. Emily felt a sense of closure, a feeling that she was finally ready to leave the past behind and move forward. I've been thinking about doing something new, she said, breaking the silence. I want to help others who have been through similar experiences. Maybe volunteer at a shelter or work with a support group. Daniel smiled, admiration in his eyes. That's a wonderful idea, Emily. You have so much strength and compassion to offer. You could really make a difference in people's lives. Emily nodded, feeling a surge of determination. It's time to give back, to use what I've been through to help others find their own strength. They talked for a while longer, sharing stories and laughter. As the evening grew darker, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. When they finally stood to leave, Daniels turned to her with a serious expression. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call. We're always here for you. Emily nodded, her heart filled with gratitude. Thank you, Officer Daniels, for everything. As she walked home, Emily felt a lightness in her step, a feeling of hope that had been absent for so long. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, and her future was hers to shape. The next day, she made a call to a local women's shelter, offering her time and support. It was the first step in a new journey, one that would be filled with challenges and triumphs. But she was ready. Emily had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, and now she was determined to help others find their own light. And so, with the past behind her and the future bright with possibilities, Emily stepped forward into a new beginning, her heart filled with hope and her spirit unbreakable. Emily's decision to volunteer at the women's shelter marked the beginning of a transformative journey. She found solace in helping others, drawing strength from the resilience of the women she met. Each story of survival, every shared tear, and every triumphant smile reinforced her belief that she was on the right path. At the shelter, Emily met a diverse group of women from different backgrounds, all united by their experiences and their desire to rebuild their lives. She quickly became a valued member of the community, known for her empathy, kindness, and unwavering support. Her own story became a source of inspiration, showing others that it was possible to overcome even the darkest of times. One day, while organizing a support group meeting, Emily noticed a young woman sitting alone in the corner, her eyes downcast and her body tense. Something about her reminded Emily of herself just a few months ago, lost, afraid, and uncertain of the future. Emily approached her with a warm smile. "Hi, I'm Emily. Mind if I sit with you?" The young woman glanced up, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Sure," she said softly. "I'm Sarah." Emily sat down beside her, sensing the fragile trust being offered. "It's nice to meet you, Sarah. How are you holding up?" Sarah hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know. Some days are better than others, I guess." Emily nodded, understanding all too well. "I know it's tough, but you're not alone. Everyone here has been through something, and we're all here to support each other." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I just feel so scared all the time, like he's still out there, watching me." Emily reached out, gently taking Sarah's hand. "I used to feel the same way, but you're safe here, and we'll do everything we can to help you feel that way too." Over the following weeks, Emily and Sarah grew closer. Emily shared her own experiences, not just the fear and pain, but also the hope and strength she had found. She guided Sarah through the difficult process of healing, offering a listening ear and a shoulder to cry on whenever it was needed. Their bond became a source of mutual strength, and Sarah began to open up, sharing her dreams and aspirations. Emily encouraged her to pursue those dreams, helping her find resources and support to start a new chapter in her life. As the months passed, Emily's dedication to the shelter deepened. She took on more responsibilities, organizing events and leading workshops on self-defense and personal empowerment. She also began to collaborate with local organizations, advocating for better support and protection for survivors of violence. One afternoon, as Emily was preparing for a workshop, she received a call from Officer Daniels. "Emily, I have some good news," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "Jack's appeal was denied. He'll be serving his full sentence." Relief washed over her, a weight lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you, Officer Daniels. That's the best news I've heard in a long time. You deserve it, Emily. You've been incredibly strong through all of this." After hanging up, Emily took a moment to herself, letting the news sink in. She felt a profound sense of closure, knowing that Jack was no longer a threat. It was a final, decisive end to a chapter of her life that had once seemed insurmountable. That evening, at the shelter's community dinner, Emily shared the news with her friends and colleagues. The room erupted in cheers and applause, the collective joy a testament to the bonds they had all formed. Emily stood, feeling the warmth of their support. "This isn't just a victory for me," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It's a victory for all of us. It shows that we can stand up, we can fight back, and we can win. No matter how dark it gets, there's always hope, and we are never alone." The room filled with applause, and Emily looked around, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She had come so far, from the terrified girl in the gas station to a beacon of strength and hope for others. Her journey had only just begun, and she knew that, with the support of her new family, she could face whatever the future held. As she looked out at the smiling faces, Emily felt a sense of peace. She had turned her pain into power, her fear into strength, and in doing so, she had found a new purpose, a new beginning. The future was bright, and she was ready to embrace it, one step at a time.